तेरी दया हो सब पर ईश्वर, तेरी दया हो सब पर ईश्वर, सबका भला तो करना परवर। रूप रंग को तू ना माने, रूप रंग को तू ना माने, एक बराबर सबको जाने। तेरे जैसा कोई न दाता, तेरे जैसा कोई न दाता, जग का तू ही भाग्य विधाता, जग का तू ही भाग्य विधाता। तू एक धागा हम हैं मोती, तू एक धागा हम हैं मोती। हर दीपक में तेरी ज्योति, हर दीपक में तेरी ज्योति।
Namaste, my dear brothers and sisters. The love and blessings of the Mother and Sri Aurobindo to all of you from Sri Aurobindo Ashram, Delhi branch. This devotional song in the melodious voice of Prem Shila is about the divine, the ultimate giver. If you look at this universe, it's a sort of a recycling going on. We are able to give because we receive, and the one from whom we receive got it from somebody else, and that's why we are able to receive it from him. But then there has to be an ultimate giver who didn't have to receive from anyone, because it had everything. In fact, it was everything, and that is the divine. And he continues to be there uh, in all existence, and all that is that, and what is not that does not exist. So as she said, no data like you, data the giver, because he is the ultimate giver. And then some other attributes that the devotional song talks about. To him, the divine, we are all equal, completely impartial. And then, the destiny of the universe, the destiny of whatever happens is in his hands. Not that he's whimsical by nature and just decides uh, because it has the power to do this or that. The divine has a design, and it knows how to work out the destiny of everything in the universe as per that design. Even when the human will uh, tries to deviate from it, it allows it, because we have that free will. But then eventually it is the divine will that prevails. It is the destiny designed by him that works out. And that's why the opening lines, the theme lines, that the divine is like a thread, the thread that runs through a necklace, and we are the pearls in the necklace. So, what determines the position of the individual beads and their sequence and the shape that the necklace would take depends eventually on the thread. And in the second line, in the theme, uh, in every uh, lamp, lamp, the oil lamp, uh, you are the light. You are the light in every lamp. So it's not the lamp that gives the light. It is the light is something which is more mysterious than the physical lamp. So you are the light, or say to put it in modern terms, in every bulb, in every light, you are the electricity. So the electricity may not be visible, but what we see is only the bulb. But actually, the bulb is nothing unless we have that electricity. The bulb can give us light only because of the electricity. So that is the beautiful sort of analogy here that this devotional song has to, that's the sort of analogy that the devotional song has to describe the divine. And of course, the adoration of the divine automatically evokes gratitude to the divine. It's a beautiful beginning of the day. Now, turning to today's topic, it is about counseling, making a difficult phase of life easier. That's what the counselor does. And it's something very fulfilling for the counselor apart from helping the client. Because you find that in the outside world, many people carrying a lot of sorrow and conflicts and stress go about apparently normally. And whenever required, or even when not really necessary, they put on a synthetic smile, exchange pleasantries, and hardly anybody would feel that there's anything wrong in their lives. But then the person enters the counselor's chamber, and sometimes within 30 seconds, she starts crying. So, you know what was there within. And then, after spending an hour with the counselor, once again, she has a smile, not a synthetic one, but a genuine synthetic smile that comes from the empathy that she got and a little new insight that she got into her issues. In fact, the most important thing that happens is that she gets an opportunity to talk, and she has in front of her a patient listener. And that itself puts so much at ease that by the time she's ready to get up at the end of the session, she has that genuine smile. To see someone who entered crying more or less and left with that smile is one of the most fulfilling experiences for the counselor. So, with that little introduction, let me now share the PowerPoint with you. And let's hope through the PowerPoint I'm able to make a few powerful points. So this is what a counselor does, makes a difficult phase in the life of the client easier. So counseling is essentially one human being helping another human being go through a difficult phase of life with minimum pain and maximum growth, maximum learning. What type of growth? Spiritual growth. That is what the process of counseling is about. Who can counsel? Fortunately, the task of counseling is not very tightly regulated in India, with the result that anyone who is empathetic and has the time to listen to somebody ends up becoming a counselor. However, it would be better if those who start counseling and comforting others also understand this process a little more. And that's why, although this session is not meant to uh, turn everybody into a qualified counselor, but some elements of counseling can be of general use to each one of us, because uh, any relative or friend would like to comfort if someone whom they know is going through a difficult phase of life. So essentially, the counselor has to be someone who is empathetic. That is, he should feel the sorrow of the person in front of him. Of course, it doesn't mean that he also has to go through the same sorrow or get attached, because if you are counseling a large number of people and you start feeling the sorrow permanently and get attached to the clients, then you will yourself probably turn into a nervous wreck and will not be able to help anybody. But at the same time, not just understanding at the mental level, but also uh, getting some idea, some genuine idea of what the person is going through is useful. So he has to be empathetic and non-judgmental. Non-judgmental means that he should not start feeling, well, if you are going through this, it's all your fault. You did this, you did that, and it's all your fault. No matter what that person has done. What the counselor has to remember is that nobody is beyond redemption. And we all make mistakes. And therefore, the attitude has to be non-judgmental, non-accusatory. However, that does not mean that the uh, counselor loses his sense of discrimination between right and wrong. But even if the counselor thinks that what this person has done was wrong and is at least partly responsible for bringing all the troubles that this person is going through, because of that, he doesn't abandon the client. The counselor doesn't abandon the client. The counselor does not have a negative idea or a prejudice against the client. But all the same, the person can retain that without accusing the person of doing anything wrong. The person can keep in mind and bring it at the right moment, even in counseling, as we shall see a little later, making that person aware of where the truth lies and what would be a better way of reshaping your responses to the situation. So that can be brought in, but all the same, the person does not judge the client in the sense of uh, forming a mental picture, which in turn starts influencing the attitude of the counselor to the client. Means that the client has to be treated as someone who can always change. There's a possibility of change, and the client himself should eventually realize in which direction I should change. So that is the type of subtle type of a uh, change that the counselor can bring about, but then it has to be change which comes about as a result of the cooperation between the counselor and the client, as a result of the understanding that they develop, as a result of the values that they start sharing as the process goes on. But at the same time, no matter what the uh, no matter what the client has done or what has happened to the client, he has to be non-judgmental. Then, the counselor will may adopt a certain approach to the issues that the client is going through, and may also participate to some extent in planning the intervention or the plan of action about what should be done in that situation. But then the client has the freedom to accept that plan or to reject it, or may apparently accept it but not comply with it, may not put in the necessary homework which is required, because eventually the client has to work on himself or herself, and if the person does not do it, then the counselor may be frustrated. But the counselor does not have to be frustrated. He has to be, or she has to be willing to be rejected by the client, uh, either because of not agreeing or because of unwillingness to comply, unwillingness to put in the necessary work. There are various schools of counseling, various techniques of counseling available, and they're not really mutually exclusive. One can make use of more than one of those and work out a synthesis. And also, which technique one uses more in a particular situation will depend upon the issue at hand. So, for that, there's a certain intuitive judgment that the counselor has to use, whether to focus on the immediate problem, whether to try and link it with the type of childhood that the person has, and sometimes even go in for past life regression and try and see whether something that the person brought from previous lives has something to do with the type of issues that the person has in this life. So, how much back to go and what type of techniques to use can come to the counselor intuitively. And therefore, mixing techniques, selection of techniques, none of these is sacrosanct. The most important thing is to use one's common sense and the type of wisdom that the counselor has accumulated through both training and experience. And this is what we may call prudence. So eventually, there is no hard and fast rule about exactly what technique to use for counseling. Uh, so, in fact, it being a caring person, that supersedes the techniques that are used. These are roughly the type of steps in counseling, and we shall get a glimpse into these as we go along in terms of step one, step two, and so on. But essentially, it consists of uh, listening and rapport building. That is essentially what happens in the first session. The counselor hardly talks, it is the client who narrates the story. And this is also the session in which the counselor and the client develop a good relationship, a rapport is built up. Then, the counselor has to provide some feedback on the story that he has heard and help the client thereby develop an insight into the issue, including the spiritual insight. And based on that, work out a plan of action and try and get from the client some degree of commitment to the action. And then no counselor wants that the client should be permanently dependent on him or her. And therefore, one has to also work out the termination of the client counselor relationship. And if at all, have only some meetings at long intervals, maybe once in 6 months or a year, that may continue depending upon how frequent a follow up is necessary. But the best situation would be one in which the client has been left in such a way that the person not only has been able to go through the present issue with minimum pain and maximum growth, as we saw, but also gets a generalizable handle because of which now the person can handle also any problems that may arise in future. That is the type of approach which is possible through the psycho-spiritual counseling, because that gives us that generalizable handle which can be used also in any future issues. So let's go over these steps a little more in detail. So we start with the first step in which the uh, client gets a chance to talk a lot and the rapport is built up. So the client in a way discloses initially what the issue is. So it's the initial disclosure stage. This stage, the counselor talks very little. He is primarily a patient listener. Who is the best counselor that we have ever had? Perhaps Sri Krishna. Sri Krishna, through the Gita, has probably prevented more psychotic breakdowns than all the psychiatrists put together. Uh, but then what does Sri Krishna do in the first chapter of the Gita? He just listens. Arjun talks about his personal dilemma, whether to fight or not to fight. And from that, he extrapolates so much, trying to show as if his fighting will not only be bad for him, but also will ruin the family and ruin the human race and so on and so forth. Sri Krishna does not stop him from all those extrapolations. He just listens. And that is what a good counselor also does. Mainly the first day, the first day of counseling, essentially to give the client an opportunity to talk, and the counselor is a patient listener. Of course, apart from that, it is during this initial phase, the first day particularly, that you put the client at ease, make him feel relaxed. And if the client may sometimes ask, I don't know how to begin or where to begin, then give a genuine smile and tell the person wherever you like, or start from uh, how the issue began, or whatever. Say something general so that it gives the client total freedom to begin the way the client wants to. So, how do I begin? And so sometimes the client may need a little prompting to begin. For example, in case of one person, it was quite obvious that the present issues had something to do with her marriage. So when the counselor asked her that, tell me something more about the marriage, she said, if I start telling, then I'll start crying. Now, here she was itching to tell somebody, but at the same time, she wanted the permission to cry, a little nod that doesn't matter even if you cry, tell me anyway. So relax her, telling her that doesn't matter, have all the time in the world, and then offer her a glass of water so that she knows that I have the permission to cry. So how do I begin? So there's no hard and fast rule about how to begin. Uh, but then one way one should not begin is ask, what's your name? What's your age? Where do you live? Give me your phone number. Give me your email. All this contact information is necessary. But all of it doesn't have to come in one go. So otherwise it looks more like an interrogation. And therefore that also has to come in steps rather than the way as if it would look as if a form has to be filled up and we are going through a bureaucratic exercise rather than counseling. However, even in this initial phase, which is basically about listening to the client, a few interruptions are not only permissible, but also necessary. And here is a list of some of the types of interruptions that are required. One is to assure the client that the counselor is paying attention. So even if it's just a little nod or just a one word to assure that, yes, I'm listening and I'm paying attention is important. Sometimes one can ask for a little clarification. Apart from getting that clarification, it also um, assures the client that not only the counselor is paying attention, but also wants to truly understand me, wants to understand my problem. Then one can say some words to sympathize with the client, to appreciate that what you are going through and how you are handling it, I truly appreciate. And for this, one can sometimes make an I statement like, if I were in your position, I wouldn't be able to do it. Sometimes the interruption can be in the form of trying to rephrase what the person has said in different words, sometimes more effective words, so that once again the client knows, yes, this counselor has truly understood me. To summarize what has happened so far, uh, again, that helps in giving a certain structure as well as assuring the client that, yes, I have been heard and the counselor has been able to go to the heart of the issue. Sometimes, the client would have a tendency to go in many different directions, and some of them may be completely irrelevant to the present problem. To some extent, yes, that also has to be allowed. And it's the counselor's job to keep extracting from it what is really relevant and thereby form a mental picture of what really the heart of the issue is. But same time, once in a while, if the digression is too much, then in a gentle and tactful way to bring the client back on track. That also is permissible in the initial phase on the very first day. Now, what time to bring in any of these interventions is important. So which of these should come will require sort of an intuitive sense of the right timing. So timing is at the heart of the art of therapy. William Doherty is a specialist in marriage and family therapy, and we'll have an opportunity to turn to him repeatedly during this session. There are certain things which should not be done on the very first day, and these are some of the don'ts. One, of course, is that don't make it look as if one is filling up a form. It's an interrogation rather than counseling going on. Apart from that, avoid looking at the watch. Although a session typically is about 1 hour, one doesn't have to look at the watch for doing it. At the most, one can have a clock or something so positioned that without seeming to actually look at the watch, you still can keep track of time. But to look at the wristwatch uh, very openly gives the client a feeling that the counselor is in a hurry. The counselor should be relaxed, should not be in a hurry to. That should not. So don't look at the watch. Don't start taking detailed notes. One can note down a few key points, a few milestones in the life, but not elaborate notes, because that again discourages the client. Sometimes feels whether you are listening to what he's saying or just busy writing. More than that, the client may feel that anything that I utter gets recorded in writing, and that is something which a person does not like. Uh, one should not, the counselor should not start talking about himself. Making an occasional I statement that if I were in your place, well, this is something I would not be able to do. To appreciate the client is different. But the counselor should not start talking about his life, his problems, how he has handled them. That is a strict no. Then the next step is an in depth exploration, developing an insight into the issue, an insight which may be different from the insight that the client had, and it could be a spiritual insight. And sometimes that can simplify matters a lot. As the mother has said, life could be quite simple and easy if man's mind did not introduce in it so many useless complications. So the person can develop a new insight, a spiritual insight into the problem, including a generalizable sort of an insight that everything that happens in life is an opportunity for spiritual growth. Then defining the problem itself makes the person feel better. Sometimes by taking away all those unnecessary complications which the client's human mind had introduced. So the person feels better after getting a little more clarity on the issue and weeding out those unnecessary complications. Then work out a plan of action based on the new insights gained. And a good counselor makes sure that the client also grows spiritually through the exercise. Now, who decides the plan of action? Here, there's a little cultural difference. In the West, the clients do not like to be told what to do. So it is the client who, it's from the client that the plan of action emerges. As the new insight has been developed, that should help the client work out the plan of action based on that. Whereas in India, it is quite acceptable for the counselor to suggest the plan of action. So suggestions are received more easily and in India than in some of the Western countries. But then that difference is not absolute, it is relative. And sometimes it would depend on the individual client also. But in India, unless to some extent the counselor has real solutions to offer or a plan of action to offer, the client may sometimes feel that what is it then I'm come to this person for, if he can't even tell me what to do. So, uh, instead of feeling that who is he to tell me what to do, the person in India has sometimes a tendency to think, what is it that I have come to him for if he can't even tell me what to do? So, the situation is the same, but these are two different ways of looking at it. So, depending upon what seems more appropriate to the situation, one can decide how to work out the plan of action. Now, this is, as I said, this cultural difference is not absolute, it is relative. And here is William Doherty in his beautiful book, Soul Searching. He says that if I am dealing with a marital problem, then I don't have to be completely neutral. I don't have to just leave it to the client to decide what to do. Because I'm not a garage mechanic who is just checking out an old car and helping an owner decide whether to repair it or junk it. So it's not the owner's decision, or in the case, the client's decision totally, whether to uh, try and save the marriage or to go for a divorce. The counselor can play a subtle role in going towards repairing the marriage rather than going for a divorce. So sometimes, the client might have more or less decided to walk out of the marriage when it was not really necessary. And it is the counselor who can now give a new insight into the issue and try and show that the situation is not as bad as you think. It is not beyond repair. Something can be done about it, and this marriage is worth saving. Now, the plan of action essentially decides setting the goal. That is, what is it that we are aiming at? The plan of action could include one or more of these: a choice to be made, whether to save the marriage or to go for a divorce, for example. That's a choice to be made. A change, a change in dealing with the situation and coping with the situation. How to cope when one can't change the situation. For example, in case of choice, whether to save the marriage or going for a divorce, the type of change required, whether to just weep and sulk or to talk back or to ignore. Weeping and sulking should be in general out of the plan of action. Talking back, if it can help in changing the situation. For example, in the case study we were talking about the other day, the mother-in-law was keeping track of the number of sweets or the number of apples that were there some time back, and now the number has gone down, and apparently trying to say it in front of the daughter-in-law to make her conscious that I know that you have eaten it. And here, the client had to be encouraged to talk back without raising the voice. And as I told her, you have to say it only once without raising your voice. I have been married 7 years. This is my home. I left my parental home and adopted it as my home. And in my home, I have the freedom to eat whatever I like, whenever I like, as much as I like. You have to say it just once and you'll see there'll be a change. So sometimes a cool, calculated talking back without getting emotional, without raising one's voice may be required. Then ignore. As the mother has said, if you are sure what you are doing is right, then go on doing it with simplicity and sincerity without worrying about the reactions of others. Reactions of others can change only if the others change. But it's very difficult to change others. We can change only ourselves. But we can certainly ignore the reactions of others if we feel that, if we are sure that what we are doing is right. We just go on doing it with simplicity and sincerity. And once again, a typical mother-in-law, daughter-in-law problems. Sometimes the mother-in-law does not like that the daughter-in-law is going out of her way to help the domestic help, say helping her child's education or sharing with her whatever nice things to eat happen to be available at home. The mother-in-law may not like it. Or say one simple example, once I know a lady narrated that if the servant enters the house with her footwear on, she's at once told, "How many times have I told you to leave your footwear outside? It's cold." He can understand that the maid will, her feet will feel cold if she comes in barefooted. But he tells her that. And in the next breath, if this person's granddaughter is without footwear in the house, go and put on something on your feet. Aren't you feeling cold? So he can see the granddaughter feeling cold, but he doesn't want to acknowledge that the maid will also feel the domestic help will also feel cold in the same way. So the domestic help is told to leave the footwear or the chappal outside. The granddaughter, when she's barefoot, she's told to put on something on her feet, to put on something. So, this type of, so uh, this type of behavior, sometimes the daughter-in-law can't understand and accept. So what she has to do is she has to ignore and maybe make some arrangement that the domestic help is also not without footwear. Maybe keep another set of clean footwear in the house and tell her, okay, you can leave the footwear outside, but when you enter, you put on this one. So ignore the reactions of others. Sometimes that can be also a change in attitude required. Then coping. For example, if the stress is due to too much of work, then a few uh, things which can help in coping with the situation is saying no to certain things. This is something I can't do. More than this, I can't do. If I do more than this, then I'll have to go in for a divorce. My partner will feel that you leave so early in the morning, you come back so late in the evening. My partner would not like to live with me. So, in whatever way one likes to put it, but essentially saying no. Then working more efficiently so that one can do more in less time. Managing time better. Uh, that can also help in coping with overwork and developing an inner strength so that you can do more without getting overwhelmed by it. So, all these coping processes are essentially a type of learning that is happening. And again, David Frawley, another a person with very deep insights, was gone deep into the ancient Indian scriptures and Ayurveda. He says therapy is a learning process. Then the next step would be to actually do something, intervention. This can include both listening and talking, listening to the client and the counselor talking. Some specific type of therapy may be designed. And if the person feels that this person needs psychiatric help rather than just counseling, then referring the person to a psychiatrist. Broadly speaking, we have two types of mental issues. Uh, one is neurosis, the other is psychosis. In neurosis, the person is essentially normal, but is unable to cope with the type of stresses the person is going through. Now, this is relative because there can be one person who can have this much of a problem and still get overwhelmed by it because the coping mechanisms are poor, and another person can have this many problems and still have no issues because the person's capacity to cope with it is much better. So, it's all relative. On the whole, it appears that particularly in the middle class, which has expanded a lot, in which the resources are plentiful and the children are small in number, just one or two children in the family, the children are being pampered. The parents are trying to meet all that the child wants, and the child is getting it very easily. And therefore, any type of disappointment in life, which is inevitable, is making the child neurotic. The child can't cope with it. In other words, the children are becoming emotionally fragile because of the type of treatment that they are getting at home, because of the way they're being pampered at home. But the world will not continue to pamper them. No matter how much the parents pamper them, for the rest of the world, they are just one out of millions. And also, the world will be much more impartial. For the parents, that is the only child. For the rest of the world, everybody is equal. So it's more impartial. So therefore, no matter how much the parents pamper, the result in an exam will not dip, will not depend upon how much the examiner loves them. It will depend upon their performance, and there are millions taking the same exams, and therefore the child does not get that, and the child cannot accept that so-called what the child perceives as rejection. So anyway, so coming back to the two major types of issues, neurosis and psychosis. In neurosis, the person is essentially normal. It's just that the person can't cope with it. And also a neurotic has a tendency to blame uh, himself for his problems. Uh, he thinks that he is in some way inadequate, and that can also drive a person neurotic. On the other hand, a person who has psychosis, this person loses touch with reality. And therefore, he's not looking at the situation as it is, and sometimes creating an imaginary world in which the person may be more comfortable than in real life, which is far too uncomfortable. But then the person has designed in that process, designed to cope with it, an imaginary world which is cut off from reality. So the person is not in touch with reality. And secondly, a psychotic has a tendency to blame others for all his problems. He has a tendency to find a scapegoat. I am perfectly normal. It is because of this person or this person or this person that I'm having all these problems. And if he can't blame any person, then he says that, well, that is my fate. So he starts blaming fate. God is unkind to me. he has given me such a destiny. So fate and destiny and God being unfair, these are also the types of excuses that a psychotic may come about if he can't blame a person for his problems or the society for his problems. So these are the two major differences between a neurotic and a psychotic. A neurotic is essentially in touch with reality and tends to blame himself for his problems. A psychotic, in general, is cut off from reality and tends to blame somebody else for his problems. So it is the psychotic who needs psychiatric help. Neurotic can be helped purely through counseling, but a psychotic may need some medication which only a psychiatrist can prescribe. So then referral to a psychiatrist. Of course, counseling can continue, and counseling would be helpful even to a psychotic, but then sometimes after some acute symptoms like some hallucinations or delusions have been taken care of through medication. Then the client doesn't have to be made dependent on the counselor. So there has to be a termination phase. So the client has to be weaned from the counselor and reassured that if necessary, I'm always there for you. But right now, you can live your life on your own. You are independently. And in spiritual counseling, the person also has got a generalizable handle that no matter what happens, I can try and see through the problem and find out how it can be for me an opportunity for spiritual growth. So if one can see through the problem in view of this wider perspective, one can go through it. So seeing through the issue helps in going through it with not only minimum discomfort, but sometimes with pleasure. That is, one can accept everything with equal delight. That is what samatva is about. So both the ups and downs of life are received with equal delight because both are an opportunity for spiritual growth and both are necessary. And this is rather complex, but at the same time, it is what a therapist should have in his heart. For example, the first one is I charge my clients for my time and experience, my heart is free. So a few other dictums which could be helpful to a person doing psycho-spiritual counseling. Now, the ethics of counseling uh, are a little different from just being empathetic and so on. And that's why a little emphasis on this. Uh, Firstly, do no harm. For example, suppose the client is a social activist. The person is not angry with an individual because that individual has hurt him. So he's not looking at the issue from a personal point of view. The person is a social activist. He has observed a social evil and wants to do something about it, and sometimes has just overestimated his capacity to change the world. It's not easy to change the world. Sometimes we take on much more than we can handle. But that doesn't mean that the counselor has to tell him that, well, you are bothered about these problems because you have no real personal problem of your own, or that you are just trying to appease your conscience by doing this, the world will not change. So the person does not have to discourage the client to such an extent that trying to tell the person it's all your fault. You're trying to change the world. Nobody has been able to do it. So many social workers and reformers have come and gone. The world has not changed. Who are you trying to do? What are you trying to do? So that way, the person is actually doing some harm to the client and as well as to the society. So uh, how to put it, how to give the client a little sense of proportion is one thing, but to discourage the person from this type of activism would be another. So do no harm. Secondly, prevent harm. Now, this prevent harm, because sometimes the client's attitude can be such that the person may be in a depression and may try to maybe having suicidal tendencies, or the person may be unfair to somebody else in the family because the person is too biased in favor of himself and uh, against somebody else. So the sense of proportion might have been lost. So there again, the counselor's task would be to try and prevent any such harm. And for that, the confidentiality, which normally should be there between the client and the counselor, might have to be broken. For example, if the person has suicidal tendencies, then this information might have to be shared with the police or some relevant authorities. Uh, then the client's interests come first. There's a question mark after that, because while the client's interests do come first, because that is the person who is seeking help, but that doesn't mean that in that process, the client ends up being unfair to the rest of the family or being unfair to the society. So that also has to be kept in mind. Uh, this is a bit unlike what a lawyer is expected to do. For example, in case of, say, a marital problem, the lawyer's interest may be restricted to the what is into the interest of the client. Say if uh, even when the divorce is not inevitable, if the client wants it, the lawyer is ready to work towards the divorce and then try and make sure that the economic interests of the client are uh, catered to at the cost of being unfair to the other. Say if you're working for the wife, then trying to extract as much as possible from the husband. And if the lawyer is working for the husband, then try to save the husband as much money as possible. And if possible, get some money from the wife for maintenance of children, for example, and so on. So the lawyer's approach can be quite different from that of a counselor. The counselor has to try and see that the client is not unfair to the partner who is not in front of the counselor. Because this type of biased advice in which the client's interest comes first, no matter what, uh, is at the expense of truth. And this may lead to some short-term gains, but it's the long term, it is not even in the interest of the client. So as William Doherty says again in this Soul Searching, the bent needle of truth can only knit a tangled relational web. So do not try to bend the needle of truth just to uh, save the immediate situation, make the client feel good right now, and trying to find some sort of a short-term solution to the present issue. So it will be very short-sighted and will eventually cost the client many relationships if the counselor supports uh, bending the truth. Then, the counselor should avoid having a dual relationship with the client. He has to be friendly, but remember that the client is not a friend, it's a client. And therefore, do not accept gifts or favors. And of course, when it comes to a sexual relationship, never. All these ethical codes that we have talked about, all these points in the ethics of counseling, they can be followed without necessarily being compassionate, which means that compassion goes beyond ethics. And that is one of the most essential requirements. Compassion is one of the most essential requirements for the counselor. Integral psychology, that the psychology which is based on the spiritual philosophy of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother, which looks at the totality of the person, which includes, apart from the body and the mind, also the soul including also the dynamic aspect of the soul, that is, which participates in day-to-day life and helps us make the best choices in a given situation. That is integral psychology. And the way it helps is by giving us a positive way of looking at all situations, no matter what. Uh, this American psychologist, Richard Carlson, uh, has written several books, more than 20 books, which he wrote within a very short time. In his short life, he died sometime in his 40s, suddenly of a heart attack, uh, while he was on the plane, flying from one place to another. So his life was cut short rather early, but before that, he wrote about 20 books. And one of them was this Don't Sweat the Small Stuff. It's all small stuff. Now, one of the things that he brought out in this book was that all stress essentially results from the gap between the way things are and the way I would like them to be. So, this gap between the way things are and the way I would like them to be can be bridged in three ways. One would be that, so here is, in the central one, this person is under stress because what exists is very different from what the person wants. And the person wants his husband or wife to behave in a certain way. So that is what he wants. But the partner insists on behaving in just the opposite way. So what exists is very different from what this person wants. And therefore, the person is under stress. Now, this can be solved in two ways. One is either the situation changes so that what the person wants becomes also what exists, so the situation changes. The second way is that what the person wants is the same as what exists, which means that the person changes so that now he looks at the situation differently, and therefore uh, he's quite happy with the way things are. So what exists also becomes what the person wants. And the third way is to work at both ends. That is, the person works on himself so that now the situation has changed a bit. So what exists has moved closer to what he wanted. But then he has also changed. He has started looking at the situation differently so that what he wants is the same as what exists. So these are the three different ways. So these two approaches, either the situation changes or the person changes, are not mutually exclusive. One can work at both ends. For example, if the person is under stress because the person doesn't have enough money. So one way would be that now he earns much more and earns as much as he wants. The other way would be that he reduces his desires so that he need not earn any more. What he has is enough to meet his uh, desires, which have been scaled down. And the third way would be to work a little harder, earn a little more money, so that now he has more than what he wanted, more than what he had, but it's not as much as he wanted. But then he reduces his desires so that now the little additional money that he has made is enough to meet his present desires. So uh, these are the two ways in which this gap between the way things are and the way I would like them to be, that gap can be bridged in these three different ways. Now, the most important out of these strategies remains changing oneself. So that even if the situation does not change or does not change much, one is able to close this gap. And what does working on oneself mean? What it means is one starts looking at the situation differently so that now the situation appears quite pleasant and one can look at it differently by finding something positive in the situation. For example, if the person is, say, afraid of retirement, my position will go, nobody will bother about me, my income will come down, and he can see only these negative things, and the person is under stress. But then the person can be told that there is something positive in the situation. When you retire, you'll have all the time available to do everything that you have been postponing so far. So the person has found something positive. But there are some situations in which no matter how hard one tries, this it's difficult to see anything positive. For example, suppose a person at age 40 has cancer and he has school going children and he's the only breadwinner in the family. Uh, how can he see anything positive in this situation? He has been told that you may not live for more than 2 years, and therefore he's under stress. But even in this situation, from the spiritual angle, there can be something positive that can be found. Even this incurable disease like cancer at the wrong time, because there's never a right time, but all the same, this is a particularly wrong time. Age 40, the only breadwinner, and having school going children, and so on. So, even this can be an opportunity for spiritual growth for the patient as well as for the children, the rest of the family whom he's worried about. And a little physical hardship that they go through uh, will be nothing as compared to what they will gain. Because what the patient and the caregivers can gain in terms of spiritual growth in a few years will exceed what is possible in several decades of so called normal life. And how that happens is that this person becomes aware of his limitations, becomes aware of the fragility of life, of the fleeting nature of life and not its pleasures. And the result is this person becomes more loving and caring. And the positivity that he develops to others, the ease with which he now apologizes to those whom he has hurt, the ease with which he forgives those who have hurt him, all that is something that makes him grow spiritually. And the atmosphere of this peace and love that he creates around himself starts influencing also his children and the family. And the result is that the patient, the caregivers, and many more grow spiritually through this process. And of course, so far as the responsibility to the family goes, this is a responsibility that has been given to him by the divine, and the divine has no shortage of instruments. So there will always be somebody found as an instrument. Nothing will collapse. Life will still go on for the family. So the spiritual angle gives us a way of thinking positively without any limitations. Logic has limitations. For example, in this case of this person getting cancer at 40, there's no logical way of seeing anything positive. But from the spiritual point of view, it is possible to see something positive. And in fact, from the spiritual angle, every situation, without exception, is an opportunity for spiritual growth. So that makes the possibility of positive thinking from the spiritual point of view completely unlimited. So that's what is meant by this statement by David Frawley. True awareness is the ultimate cure for all psychological disorders. True awareness of the deepest truths of existence, the uh, existence as the spiritual worldview looks at. And that's why to be in the company of those who have this wider spiritual perspective can also help. And that's why he says that better than going to a therapist is frequenting the company of spiritually elevating people. The mere presence of such wise people cools and calms the mind and heart. Lack of spiritual company is a main cause of psychological unrest, and the only cure is to find such association. That's what happens in satsangs, where like minded people, spiritually inclined people meet, and spiritual truths, which are easy to understand at a mental level but difficult to practice, keep coming up again and again. And this repetition helps in applying them more and more to real life situations. One may know something, but these are the type of truths which need repeating. They bear repeating because it's not easy to apply them in practice. It's so easy to forget them in the real world when faced with real situations. And that is the importance of going regularly to places where such events happen, the way it happens in Sri Aurobindo Ashram Delhi branch on every Sunday at 10 in the morning. We find that some of the people who come for those satsangs are the same. They keep coming week after week, every Sunday at 10 in the morning. And then some of them have a post-satsang satsang. Satsang is essentially good company. So they extend this company at the end of the session outside the meditation hall. They start sharing their joys and sorrows. And some of them are able to help others look at the joys and sorrows, particularly the sorrows from a spiritual angle. And that is how they end up stimulating one another's spiritual growth while also making the other person feel more at ease. And this is an approach which is not entirely an Indian approach. William Doherty, again in that book, Soul Searching, says that therapists, we are moral consultants, not just psychosocial consultants. And this is relatively easy because therapists are privileged to be with people at moments of personal and moral intensity. So when the person is charged with a psychological issue, that is the time at which the person is also more amenable to the moral or spiritual approach. And therefore, he laments the fact that from around 1970 to 1990 was the golden age of counseling, where this approach was quite common in the US. But post 1990, the limited resources led to more restricted funding by insurance companies, more limited reimbursement, and therefore only fewer sessions were possible, and therefore counseling became more and more problem focused. It did not provide people with a generalizable handle for handling all stressful situations, so it turned into more of troubleshooting. So the choice today in the existing situation in the US particularly is that either the therapist can use only techniques and medication, only techniques, that is techniques of psychological techniques of psychotherapy, when medication is not required or is not enough. So along with medication, when some counseling is also required. So this is one uh, approach, that is restricting the intervention to the minimum. Only medication, then just medication. If that is not enough, bring in some psychological techniques. Or if medication is not necessary, do some troubleshooting through psychological techniques. So this is one choice. The other is to use this opportunity of counseling also as being a moral and spiritual consultant. Finally, counseling is an opportunity for spiritual growth. For whom? Both the client and the therapist. A good therapist also grows spiritually through the process, not only because the person finds in the client an opportunity for giving what the person has to someone who needs it, but while giving a clearer insight, a spiritual insight into the issues that the client has, gives the counselor also an opportunity to introspect and sometimes look at his own attitude to life, and he finds that his own approach to life has also not been sufficiently rooted in these deeper truths of existence, in spiritual truths. And therefore, the person gets an opportunity to have a relook at his own life, at his own actions, and redirect his own life. So, both by being able to give what he has to the client who is ready to receive, and through this chance opportunity for introspection, the counselor also grows spiritually through the process of counseling. You'll find some of this material in this book, Understanding Spirituality, particularly in chapter 4. This is a picture postcard view of the inside of the Sri Aurobindo Ashram Delhi branches, meditation hall. And you're all welcome here. And for any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to send us an email on yes@yesspirituality.com. Gratitude to the Mother and Sri Aurobindo for making these sessions possible. And thank you all for being there. Today we have the good fortune of having with us a real counselor who is highly qualified and is actually in practice, particularly counseling the young people and their parents in relation to career. But then there are many things, useful things that she could share with us today. And fortunately, she's here. Some of you have heard her in one of the YES talks earlier, and she's going to give another YES talk in February too. But she's here in person in the ashram. So I have requested her, and she has kindly agreed to share some of her insights and maybe some of her uh, characteristic cases with you. So over to Sri Vidya. Switch off the video. Let's go there and switch on the video.
Very good morning to everybody here. And it's my good fortune that I happen to be there on a day wherein I could contribute. And thank you so much to Aurobindo Ashram, to Dr. Bijlani, to Aditi, and the entire YES team for making these mornings so meaningful and so spiritually enhancing. I have attended so many sessions, and it is really a privilege and my good fortune to be able to speak a little bit and share my experience. So, thank you, Dr. Bijlani, for a very detailed, stepwise introduction of how counseling proceeds. I thought maybe from my experience as a counselor who has been working with teens, students, professionals, and also women and parents over the last few years, maybe I could share a little bit of how the process proceeds and what are the things that sometimes stand out. And it's the journey both of the counselor as well as the person who is seeking help from you. So, while I will talk as if it is one case, actually, it's a consolidation of different types of cases that I'll be presenting, and there's no real structure. So, and I'll take about 10, 12 minutes. And in case there's any question or whatever, I'll be happy to handle it. So, okay, so I think I'll start with something which I hear a lot these days. Especially a parent would come in and say, my child or my teenager is not studying, is not focused, is on gadgets for a large part of the day. And it has become really bad after COVID. And now they're in grade 10 or maybe grade 11. And I'm really, really worried about what to do. Can you do something to fix the problem? And this very broad problem will come under the rubric of career counseling in their perspective. That, suddenly maybe if you can give them clarity about what to study or what to do, maybe all of these other presenting problems will also go away. There is a mild, or probably a very insightful truth in that statement that if we enjoy what we do, then we do it with joy and distractions don't distract us anymore. So usually a session of career counseling starts somewhere there, but there are many expectations attached to that session apart from giving direction to what is it that a person could choose as a career. So, specifically, whenever something like this comes up, I I usually spend half an hour even before I start the engagement in a formal way with the teenager and the parent. And I spend half an hour just understanding the parental context. And I spend about half an hour speaking to the teenager to make sure that the teen is not being pushed for counseling. Because that is probably the most harmful thing we can do, wherein we just push somebody to do something. So, voluntariness is for me one of the most critical things in the counseling process, and especially when parents say, can you counsel my teen? So that's one thing. And in that process is where rapport formation or building trust starts for me. So, and then I try to have individual sessions with the teen. So there was this one classic situation wherein the teenager wasn't listening, wasn't paying attention, was getting poor grades. The parents were very hassled, a very expensive school, was not eating well, and the whole house was very conflicted. You can imagine the tension that happens in the house when you have a nuclear family and there are only one or two children and the child is not perceived as doing well at that point in time. A couple of conversations with the teenagers have actually revealed a few things which sometimes the parents are not aware of. So, bullying. So, in one case, the teenager had been bullied a lot in her school, and she had never talked about it to her parents. And the parents never knew. And somewhere in those years when she was being bullied, she used to come back to an empty home with a helper. And there was nobody really to provide socio-emotional support to her. And she would turn to TV or gadgets to distract herself. That's where it started. And in the weekends, when the parents would have so many chores to do, along with taking care of the children, TV and gadgets again became an easy way out. And this I've seen. I mean, I'm a parent myself. I've seen how sometimes we just turn to a gadget to fix a problem. So I realized that that sharing of that hurt had not happened. And it was it was more an encouragement of helping the child find the courage to talk to the parent at their own time, rather than sitting and focusing on specific career related issues or telling them speak respectfully, eat healthy, because it wasn't that at all. So often the problem is not what it presents itself to be, it's deeper. And listening to all the nuances and understanding and seeking permission from the client of, this seems to be the issue. Do you want to have a chat with your parents about it? And I don't need to be there for it. But saying that I'll be there at the back end in case you need any help has done wonders in terms of ironing out communication and conflict challenges. And I think that's very beautiful when the student takes on the courage to do that, because then it's exactly that. You've helped them take that one step and you don't really need to be there anymore. You're not constantly there trying to tell them, okay, do this, do that. Listening and the first session is very critical. And sometimes it's not the first session. So now I'll switch to another case of a lady probably in her 40s, and men also, who was very caught up in her work and was going through a very tough situation in her marriage. And till now, she had ignored it. There was no need for her to confront the problem. She always knew there was a problem. But she was forced to confront the problem when her life situation changed. So she had been living for years away from her in laws and her husband with her mother. And the marriage continued, and they would meet on weekends, even though they stayed in the same city. Something changed in the dynamics of the family, and she realized that I cannot keep staying on in this house anymore. And that's when she was forced to confront the situation. And that's when our interactions started. And the first few sessions is actually a lot of crying in some situations like this because it borders on abuse or violence, which is why you choose to not stay together. But having said that, I have found that a lot of women, especially, they underestimate the levels of courage they actually have. So, taking from Dr. Bijlani's thing of every opportunity is a case of spiritual growth, over a journey of asking them to talk about their strengths, talk about what happened, specific questions of what, how, so you're able to set the context empathetically, give them a lot of reassurance, and especially say, I don't know what I would have done in such a situation. This is truly, truly a challenging task. And to mean it from the heart. Because, if we don't mean it from the heart, the client knows. So, counseling is a very heart centric process for me. And I try and I always start my sessions with a small prayer. And I end my sessions with a small prayer. And if I find that the person I'm working with is spiritually inclined, we actually pray together. But if they are not, then I do it quietly on my own. The point being that we have to have the wisdom to say the right things, to pause, listen, and maybe initially give them a couple of solutions so it's easy for them. So in this lady's case, it was just simple solutions of, okay, is there a way in which you can even have sessions with me without being interrupted? So coming down to specific logistics, I had to solve that problem first. Then to talk about how can you have more protection in your life so that this doesn't continue. Without security, without that feeling of being protected, survival needs are hit. So to make sure that that survival aspect is taken care of was critical. And here was a lady who was actually working and earning well. Then to help her understand how financially empowered she is and how, if she chooses to, she can take a drastic decision and move on. And it may not be drastic in her situation, or she can take time out. And these didn't come out as solutions to me. They came out later, wherein I would ask, okay, what else do you think you can do? How is your son responding to what is happening? Who else do you meet? So I would look at what is it that they do in their entire day that gives them energy and takes away energy, and try to help them pinpoint things that keep giving them energy, because it is so important to say no. It's so important to hold your stand coolly. And if we can't do that, Dr. Bijlani also said that you just need to say it once, that this is my house and I have to be able to live here. And in most cases of marital conflict, I have found that people haven't been able to take that stand and say it coolly. Either it'll be a firefighting kind of situation wherein there's a huge quarrel, or there'll be a lot of sulking, or there'll be this sense of depression, frustration, venting out to someone else, or when it becomes a vicious circle of you are nasty to me, so I'll be nasty to you, and you are nasty to me, and I'll be nasty to you. And then the client has actually enhanced the problem at their end. So to identify those small, small, small life episodes wherein they can go and make a small tweak to their response pattern, and that becomes the aha moment for them. And then to put another building block there and say, okay, let's look at something else. So what I've realized is that it's very organic, the process. For some people, in a few sessions, they've crossed miles which they think they needn't ever have crossed, or they never thought they would do. And for some, for many sessions, there's no progress. And then I start doubting myself. Am I on the right track? Am I being helpful enough? Am I being able to identify the problem well? In some cases, after a sudden pause, they'll come back with a leap progress because they've been incubating with some things. So then you know that you're on the right track and you're helping them in some way or the other. So it's a constant inward and outward process for us also as counselors. So as a counselor, I also keep seeing what is my bandwidth. How many people can I take on in a day? How much time do I put in for the sessions? How much is my buffer between one session and the other? Because even if we say 1 hour, the first few sessions may take longer. And calling it off abruptly at that point is not my personal call. I feel you have to allow it to flow for some time till it reaches that point of, okay, the person has come in crying but is going out with hope and a smile. That transition has to happen as far as possible in every session. So that's my personal style actually. And I work towards that, and hence I draw in those buffers. And I pause a lot in my sessions to understand and paraphrase. And in those pauses, I think the person who has been talking for so long gets time to reflect. So it's a journey, and there have also been times wherein, especially with career choices, parents sometimes come back after maybe a year and they say, no, we chose a career track even though the student wasn't comfortable with it. And those are the places wherein I have to accept that, this was a rejection, it didn't go through. And that's also a journey to accept that this is how much you can do, and this is what you can learn, this is what I can learn, and maybe the next time the journey may be a little different. So it is very fulfilling, it is very soul searching, it is hard work. People say hard work, I say it's hard work. And yeah, that's all. Thank you so much. Let me take this. Just move a little bit.
Vidya made some very important points, and towards the end, she said that the session doesn't have to end abruptly at 1 hour. That is very true because uh, it is a relationship we are building up, and a relationship of concern and empathy, and not a business deal. And uh, instead of 1 hour, 1.25 hours or so is extremely common. We have to just let it flow and come to a natural sort of winding up. Uh, Sometimes it goes on much longer, occasionally. The longest session that I can remember is 2.5 hours. One single session with one person. The first session went on for 2.5 hours. I have two short questions for Vidya now. Vidya, you talked about two sets of problems. One was regarding teenagers. Sometimes the solution that the parents come up with is we think that if we send the child to a hostel, then probably the child will get disciplined and the problems will be solved. What do you think about that as a solution?
So this hostel solution always catches my attention and it sends a few alarm bells sometimes. And the reason I say this is this. You see, parenting is a journey. It's a journey of two adults becoming parents and the child also growing up. So when the parents choose to send their child to the hostel for a significant number of years, then in a way, you have taken away the opportunity for your own growth as a parent. That's number one. And the second thing is when they say that हमसे बनता नहीं है, बहुत indisciplined है, हमारी बात सुनता नहीं है, हम हॉस्टल में भेज देंगे, हॉस्टल में ठीक कर देंगे उनको. That's the mentality that sometimes it comes with. I gently tell them that hostels are places where everything happens. You have children who are very disciplined. You have children who have taken to drugs and smoking also very early. It's a whole world. And the warden or the house parent doesn't have one or two children. They have 40, 50 children to take care of. And yes, there are rules and regulations, but those house parents are also human. So what you can do for your child, someone else may not be able to do that well. And that's something that you want to consider before you send your child to a hostel. And if you are really planning to send your child to a hostel, then please see what is the hawa of the hostel? What is the atmosphere? What is it known for? So recently, I came across a case of a teenager who went to a hostel. She was initially not inclined towards it at all. Then, after a while, she went and she visited the place. She seemed to like it. And she settled down. Her biggest problem was gadget addiction. And in that hostel, gadgets were not allowed at all. And she has really adjusted to that place. It has very deep philosophical roots. The peers are very supportive. And the hava of that place is so deeply spiritual that that girl has elevated herself. And the parent is very happy. But I've also seen situations which degenerate a lot. So, running away from taking the responsibility of helping your child through a critical situation may not be the solution. We have to look deeper. And essentially what that parent said is that पर मेरे पास patience नहीं है उसको ठीक करने का. Then clearly for the counselor, the question is, who is your ultimate client? It's the parent and not the child. Because we have to help the parent also develop that patience, because the hostel may help, may not help. So Dr. Bijlani, sending the hostel, it's like an escapist route in many cases. In some cases, it may work. So I wouldn't want to put it totally out. Some colleges and some hostels, and in some situations, if the family situation is very stressful, then maybe sending the child to a hostel for some time may help if there are situations in the house that are very stressful. So it's very contextual, but to take it as Dr. Bijlani once said, is the hostel a jail that they will discipline and you send the child to a jail? Yes, I mean, if that's what we are saying, then maybe we need to reflect on that as parents also. Yeah.
The age of the child may also matter. What is the youngest age you think at which a good hostel could be a solution?
It's a very tough question. If the family is a loving context and there are parents or there are caretakers and everything is fine, then and if you're looking at a peer group enhancing, or if you're looking at providing them more structure, more facilities, and things like that, I would say middle school upwards, but nothing before that. At a very young age, my general feeling and a lot of psychology says is that parents are able to nurture, and the more nurturant the relationship is and the attachment initially with the parents or the caretaker, the more the child develops their own inner conscience, their psychic, their own being, their soul. And that's very important to feel connected with your family and to also feel connected with yourself. So very early, while hostels take children as early as 6 7 years also, uh, personally, unless there is a real reason, something that is harming the child at home, I would say defer it to later, wherein you feel it's more appropriate and actually maybe more fulfilling. You need to provide more curricular activities, more classes, more labs. Your town doesn't offer it, your city doesn't offer it. Then maybe you can look at that as an option. But it has to be a voluntary option wherein you and the child yourself together go through that journey rather than, okay, this is it. Now you go there and I'm paying you the fees and I'll see you once in 3 months. So that for me doesn't have any compassion.
That's a very balanced answer that takes care of perhaps all possible situations. In general, early teens, not before early teens, 13 or 14 years of age, and for all practical purposes, never at the age of 6 or 7, unless at home there is a situation which is doing the child some harm, which could be prevented by going to a hostel. So uh, there are always exceptions to everything, including the fact that a child of 6 should not be sent to a hostel. There can be an exception, even to that, such a common sense stand. Now, about the second set of problems that you talked about, that is related to marriage. In general, the counselor's attempt is to repair the marriage because quite often the uh, clients, the couple, tend to look at the situation more and more negatively. It becomes a sort of a vicious cycle. As you said, you are being nasty to me, I'll be nasty to you, and so on and so forth. So it is the counselor who shows them that there's a lot positive also in your marriage. And if you focus on that, then we can have a much happier life together. But perhaps there are two situations in which sometimes the counselor herself uh, encourages the couple to go in for a divorce instead of living in misery. And those two situations perhaps are extramarital affairs, particularly when it is not just a one-off but a trend. It's sort of repeated extramarital affairs. And the second is domestic violence. Would you like to comment on that?
I think our first thing is that we have to prevent harm. So a violent situation is a no-go. And well, when confronted with such a situation, I've at least told them to find different physical spaces to stay for some time and cool off and think. That's the first thing, because at that point in time, they're also not in a place sometimes to talk about divorce or legalities or the economic hardships of living single. So, you don't touch a wound, you give it time to air, you give it time to heal, and it's only then that you can again start exercising that limb. Because post a divorce, it means a lot of exercising that limb. So I've usually then directed or helped them find decent physical spaces to live in, or look at options which could be with extended family, or if they're financially empowered, as in the case that I had mentioned, please go out and rent a space of your own. What stops you, apart from your own mindset that I should be living with my husband who is abusive, and then feeling very, very sad and very, very vulnerable? So to give them the courage that it's okay, even if you stay in a small town, if you are in a violent relationship, you need to step out. That's the first thing, because without that, it's very hard to even counsel. Like Dr. Bijlani talked of hallucinations in psychotic. You have to remove that symptom to be able to talk further. So something like this, we have to remove to be able to talk further. I mean, that is very important. And even connecting them with lawyers or with NGOs, I do the necessary referral process so that they get that support and they don't feel alone. But okay, I have to fight this battle alone, which is very hard. On extramarital affairs, oh, this is such a huge area, and sometimes one partner is cheating consistently. Sometimes both are cheating on each other. Sometimes, sometimes one has done it just to hurt the other, as he or she did it to me, so I'm going to do. And it's just that cycle of hurt that they work on, and then they keep. In all of these, pausing the communication and relationship in whichever way is feasible, to me, has been the most helpful stance. We have to really pause and think what they're doing. And the world over, extramarital affairs have become very common. And there are so many people who say, "ऐसे तो होता ही है." So, and they accept it and they move on. Every other woman is going through this, or every other guy who's traveling is going through this. This is a common norm. So the questions really then become, what is the core of your marriage? We can't again have those questions when they are crying and they are weeping and they're sulking. So I do emphasize a pause. If they can again take a break from each other. So, and it's not, uncle, always a divorce. Sometimes they just live in different countries. There is a physical separation. The marriage is there for legalities, maybe, but they don't go through a divorce. And they just continue to, nurture other parts of their life. Usually, a divorce starts becoming very pertinent when one person wants to get married to somebody else, or there is abuse, or there are economic things. That's when people start pushing for a divorce, because in India, the legal process is also very messy. It's not very supportive. So, the legalities of it, I usually connect them with lawyers. From the socio emotional aspect of it, I work on it. And it's not our solution. But to help them reach the best solution, we have to give them the necessary pause, rest, ask them the necessary questions, and give them the reassurance that we are there with them through the journey, whichever part they take. That's always been. So initially, I used to always feel, no go, but I have learned that we have to look at many different facets of the relationship over a period of time. Any?
Thank you, Vidya. That comes from a lot of experience with so many clients. Aditi, are there any questions Anybody has, or in the chat?
There's a hand raised, Promita.
Namaste, sir. Namaste, Shubhidya. Thank you for a very insightful thought and word of yours. I have a reflection and a couple of questions. So, a reflection is when you mentioned about the parents willing to send their kids to hostel because they feel that they are not able to discipline them or just not able to cope up with them. Many a times it is so because they are really stressed handling the kids 24/7. So if I give my example particularly, my daughter has ADHD. She's 7 years old. And I have no support. It's just the four of us at home, me, my husband, and both the kids. And she's very demanding. And I am with her 24/7. And I don't work. I'm at home itself. So sometimes it becomes very stressful for both of us to, handle the kids. And we do feel sometimes that sending, but again, as you mentioned, that it can make or break. I mean, things are not uh, it cannot be 100% positive as we feel. So yeah, these challenges are always there. So I don't know how to handle things when there is no support and people are stressed with kids because they are handling them 24/7. So that is the reflection, or maybe you can put it as a question I have. Now the question is with the kids who are many of them have affected with this after the COVID struck us badly in terms of learning and studies. So how do we, encourage children, especially who are, in their teens, like in 8th, 9th, and 10th standard, to study, because this is a very crucial time for them. And many of them are just not willing. I mean, they are totally disconnected from the studies, not motivated at all, sticking to the gadgets all the time. So I just wanted to know if there is anything we as parents can do to motivate the children to study instead of, directly approaching a counselor at first. Can we as a family or as a parent can do something at home so that the children can be motivated? This is particularly I'm asking about my son who's in 8th standard. So he has lost motivation at all, and no matter of telling him or scolding him, I'm just not able to bring him back to his usual self. He just thinks that I'm wasting my time in learning something which may not be applicable in my later years, or he questions, why are we doing this? There are so many interesting things in the world. Why is the history textbook so boring? So, and we are not able to answer his questions.
Thank you, Pramila, for your questions. I think these are very pertinent, and probably a lot of us go through this all the time, especially the one of children who show disinterest in studies. Telling a person to study when they are not interested in it has not worked in my experience. So, in fact, what happens is then the child further ignores or moves away, and a further conflict or distance starts getting infused between the parent and child. जब भी मुझे देखते हो आप पढ़ने पढ़ने ही बोलते हो, अभी तो पढ़ा था. Those kind of conversations start happening. And if you are in a space wherein you've just finished handling your younger child who has special needs, then you are also emotionally very low. And you see two children suffering, and you are suffering yourself. That's your space. And that's a tough space to be in. So find ways to energize yourself first. So I would say fill your cup first. Whatever it takes for you. If it's an hour of meditation, if it is having an early breakfast so that you're physically fueled. I think women, and especially mothers, run on very low fuel tanks. And I mean this In terms of food, I mean this in terms of emotional, I mean everything. So please fuel yourself first. So just sit back and think of what is it that fuels you emotionally, physically. Put that up as a post-it note, as a reminder, and make sure that your fuel is filled up. Then, whenever you see your son not studying, just see what is it that he likes to do. See, I've been an educator. The truth is that a large part of what is being taught in schools and the way it's being taught are not very relevant. And imagine if you are forced to do something for 6 to 7 hours, knowing fully well कि इसका कोई use नहीं है बाद में. How suffocated will you feel? And your teacher is saying you have to do it. Mother is also saying you have to do it. So the gadget is an escape mechanism very often, I have noticed in these teens, to kind of just escape from the reality of what they are going through. Find things that connect you and your son. A game of cricket, spend time in the park, anything which is outside of studies. You have to establish that bond with yourself, refuel yourself, and establish that bond with your son first. It's only then that then we can make course corrections. And in life, it's the truth also that we are often doing things which don't seem to add up for us. Even you as a parent might be doing it. So once you validate and understand, he feels understood, he feels listened to. That's when you will start seeing solutions that will work in your own home, Pramila.
Actually, the problem here is we share a very good understanding. So he likes to talk to me a lot, so he can, me and my husband both. So he would like to sit and talk for hours about different things in the world, about history, why some things are like that. So he's very happy doing it. But the moment we tell him to study, because he's scoring really bad, especially in math, science, and all those subjects, he starts sulking. So if we sit with him and we talk about the random stuff that he wants to talk, he will be very happy. And he does share how his day is going in school, or what he feels like someone is bothering him. He talks about everything. It's just when it comes to studies, he just doesn't want to do it. And he questions everything. He tries to find logic in everything. If I'm worshipping or performing a specific ritual, he will immediately question as to what do you gain by doing this? Have you ever seen God? So all these things. So okay, I respect his thoughts that way, but it comes with, when I tell him to study because he's scoring bad, and I'm worried because now in another 2-3 months he'll go to ninth grade, and then in no time it will be 10th. That's when he starts sulking. His right now his focus is that I want to do a graphic designing, but then I tell him that no, you have to finish your basic studies first, and then you can decide it later. But he just feels that I'm wasting my time doing all this stuff which is anyways not going to be useful for me later in life.
There's no easy solution, and talking like this without even having had a chat with him is not even feasible for me to actually provide you a solution, Pramila. So you do need, you said somewhere, instead of taking him to a counselor, I would say, why don't you take that as one of the options? Visit for yourself, chat, have a consultation, because it can help, it can do wonders. That's one thing. And sometimes marks are meaningless for these children. They're also going through a phase of rebelliousness. It's part of their identity crisis. It's said in psychology also, there's a stage wherein they question everything. So as a parent, when I would see this questioning, and I'm talking now only as a parent and not as a psychologist or counselor, initially I would try and understand what they are saying. I would also get a little hurt, and I would say, okay, what else? And then I just give the importance to the marks what it deserves. Because that's important for us also. And I have realized that when they say, okay, this needs to be done because it needs to be done, So learning is not equal to marks anymore. And that's the disconnect that your child is bringing forward. In many ways, it's a blessing that he's been able to differentiate learning from marks. Because let me tell you the parallel story of children who know nothing, but they are scoring 99 and 100. Okay, so see the blessing also, which is coming, wherein he's wanting to learn, he's wanting to question, and he's having very deep conversations with you on these subjects. It's such a blessing, actually. Marks is small, 8th grade, relax.
Let me add to that. One of the nice things you have is a good bond, a good communication, which is possible with the child. And also the fact that he questions rituals, etc., is a very healthy thing. Even Sri Aurobindo, when he was well past his teens, said that if there is a God, I want to see him, which means there was a conditional approach, if there is a God. So one who is convinced about the existence of God just because everybody says so is not someone who will probably develop also that intensity about that aspiration to actually see God. He just accepted it because everybody says so. And in general, anyone who questions the conventional approach is the one who makes the society progress. Unless there's change, how can we progress? So you could look at it that way. And a teenage, as a teenager does not have that type of behavior, he's not a normal teenager, as Vidya said. So don't have to worry about that. When it comes to maths and science, etc., if he's not good at those, I'm sure there are some other subjects which he's very good at. And just have to sort of tell him that it doesn't matter. You don't have to study maths and science all your life. It's just 2 years more, because till class 10, you have to study everything. And it's good to know a bit of everything, even if you don't like it very much. If marks don't matter, if you don't get very good marks in maths and science, doesn't matter. After that, you can choose a combination of subjects which does not involve maths and science. That's all. I'm sure a career can be made out of other combinations.
Right, I totally agree. So just allow yourself, don't get overstressed over it, and don't push yourself to the marks parameter, because you're also pushing yourself and then you're pushing him also.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you
Baldani.
so much for the
Second question she had was that the parent herself is under stress because of the child who is taking away all the attention, the younger one, I think
Right,
the
right.
daughter, and therefore she's considering actively sending her to a hostel.
Um, are you actually considering, or was that just a question?
No, we were considering, we checked a couple of hostels also, and we even went to Pondicherry and looked for that ashram school itself, but it was too late by the time. They said that we don't take beyond 7 years of age. Another thing is, when we looked at the hostels in South India, because I'm based in Bangalore, the fees is exorbitant, which we won't be able to afford. Then we dropped the idea, but there is a lot of stress at home. So just wanted to know if we can, anyway reduce it, because we don't have any support, no family or social support, as in, because me and my husband, we both are not very social, so we don't have a large friend circle. So no support basically at all. So we are only 4 of us, and 2 of us are dealing with 2 kids. So yeah.
Right. I think your question or your solution of a hostel is really coming from a place of a lot of stress on both of you as parents, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So let's start with reducing that stress first. So fill your cup first. Make sure you take time outs. Connect with your children. Even children who have ADHD. Are you seeking help for your
Yes,
younger one?
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So sometimes, they have parent support groups.
Okay.
So for you to seek out for more parent support groups, you may get that. So I would say, see if you can tackle the stress at home first and reduce it for yourself. That would be step one. And do it not with this thing of mujhe ye karna hai. Do it with this thing of mujhe bhi jeena hai. I'm also a human being. I'm a parent. I'm on this journey and I want to support my children. So remove that pressure to perform from your own scheme of things and give yourself time and seek your son's support, the older ones. Sometimes they are beautiful with younger children. Do you seek that support sometimes?
Because he's also frustrated with her. She interferes a lot and uh, touches his stuff when he clearly
Right.
doesn't want. So yeah, that's
Right.
another aspect. But yeah, I mean, he doesn't, I mean, even if he wants to, sometimes he gets really frustrated that no, I don't want to because she doesn't listen. So let her be like that. So I don't know, because he himself is not very, he's still young. 7 years,
Right.
sorry, 14 years is not that,
14 years.
yeah.
So, again, we go back to this thing of if the situation at home is very unavoidable and stressful, then yes. And in the later years, if you want to give him more support, more infrastructure, but then it becomes a joint call between your son and you as
Yeah.
parents. And you say, okay, we've done this and now we want to channelize, and hence we are doing this.
Yeah.
There is no one solution.
Yeah.
And I would not even take the chance to say that do this or don't do this. I
Yeah.
would say
Yeah.
just work on reducing your stress, check out options if you want to. And whatever you do, listen to your heart and spend time. Don't do it under any stress कि मुझे ये करना है और इससे मुझे golden solution मिल जाएगा.
Sure. I'll keep that in mind. Just one last thing. Can I connect with you if you take online sessions personally?
Sure.
So if you can please provide me your email ID or whatever.
Definitely.
Yeah. Thank
Definitely.
you so much. Thank you,
Thank you
Dr.
so
Vijay.
much. Thank you so much.
I think Vidya's email address, Aditi will be able to put on the chat. That may be one way of doing it. Or you can put your email address on the chat, then Vidya can connect with you. Both are possible. Aditi, are there any more questions?
No, there are no more questions. So I think maybe we can just close the session with a moment of silence. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Vidya.
We generally keep the